Section 4 of History of Rome and the Popes in the Middle Ages, Volume 1, by Hartmann Grissar. Chapter 1, The Last Revival of Paganism in Rome, Part 4. Statues of the Gods. With respect to the statues of the gods, old documents and recent archaeological finds prove the existence of a regular system which is instructive in that it illustrates the change then being accomplished. From the basal inscriptions which had been collected from a vast number of statues, it results that during this period a remarkable, albeit little known, practice prevailed. As a rule, the idols were removed from the temples and then, with amended inscriptions, set up as ornaments in public places. They were put on an equal footing with the city monuments, which were under the care of guardians of their own. At the meeting point of the 4th and 5th centuries, the forums, baths, and secular basilicas were peopled with a new host of superb statues of marble and bronze. Masterpieces of art, which hitherto had been concealed in the mystical half-light of the cella, where they were safe from the glances of the profane, were now set up in the streets and in public resorts, where they could proclaim openly the genius of their creators. No doubt admiration was not seldom diluted with a little fun, at the expense of the unfortunate Olympians, compelled to be thus exhibited to the public gaze. The city prefect confined himself to stating dryly in the inscription that the statue had been placed in its new quarters in such and such a year. For instance, in one such inscription, preserved at the Villa Albani, the prefect Caecina Decimus Asinatus Albinus in 414 records that he had made use of the statue for the improvement of the city which he had undertaken. Similarly, the 4 basal inscriptions of 377 found in or around the Forum state that the prefect Gabinius Vettius Probianus had placed the statues in front of the Basilica Julia for its adornment. The Curatorus Statuarum, whose business it was to supervise the removal and to watch over the statues, are mentioned in various texts. The famous Victoria, from the altar of the Senate Hall, is the only statue among those thus displaced of which the name has come down to us. With this exception, the reports and inscriptions on such statues never indicate whom the image represented. They were intended to survive only as nameless pieces of art. On the other hand, the city prefects were occasionally at pains, in the inscriptions which they added, to inform the Romans of the name of the artist who had chiseled or cast the monument. 4 bronze statues, representing no one knows what, but which were works of renowned Greek masters, are known to have been placed in or near the Forum Romanum. Their bases, which were discovered subsequently, bore the names of Praxiteles, Polyclitus, Timarchus, and Bryaxides. The first mentioned was the last to be found in 1874. In these 4 instances, the works may well be ascribed to the artists whose names they bear, the case with them being otherwise than with the colossal groups near the Quirinal. There the similar inscriptions, Opus Praxitelis, Opus Fideae, restored since the time of Sextus V, can at most only refer to the originals of which these statues are copies. Even as to the authenticity of the originals, there is considerable doubt. The words placed by Prudentius in the mouth of the Emperor Theodosius on the occasion of his discourse to the pagan senators refers to the erection of these statues in the public places. Forsake the childish festivities and the sacrifices unworthy of a great empire. Cleanse the marble statues which have been defiled by your hateful lustrations, and leave them in their simple beauty. They are the works of great masters, and it is my will that they adorn your city, and be no longer disfigured by ill usage. This was the fulfillment of the poetic vision which, according to the same poet Prudentius, was beheld by the Roman archdeacon and martyr when being tortured by the persecutor Valerian. I see, said St. Lawrence, the coming of a sovereign who, being a God-fearing man, will not leave Rome in the bondage of unclean idols. He closes the ivory portals of the temples, closes them with bolts of brass, and lays their unholy threshold under the ban. Then at last will there be brought into the light of day those marble figures desecrated and defiled by blood, and the guileless bronze now worshipped as divine. Even outside of Rome, inscriptions similar to the above and describing the transportation of idols from the temples to the public places have been unearthed. For instance, at Verona, Benevento, and Capua. This proves that the wise example of Rome formed a rule followed also elsewhere. A peculiarity of the inscriptions at Benevento and Capua, which has not been matched by anything yet found at Rome, is the fact that they record that the statues were taken from hidden places and set up in a more public situation. Probably this implies not merely that they had been taken from the privacy of the temple cell, but that they had been previously taken down and hidden away. Such a proceeding was a matter of frequent occurrence, the agents being sometimes the heathen, who wished to place the statues in safety, at other times the government, desirous of withdrawing the images from public worship, and occasionally private individuals, who wished to obtain possession of the precious masterpieces of art. There can be no manner of doubt that many of the idols which had been brought to light in different parts of Italy, even in quite recent times, had been intentionally concealed. Among those thus found outside of Rome may be mentioned the Victoria, discovered at Brescia, the Mercury now at the British Museum, and the much talked of Venus of Milo at the Paris Louvre. At Rome itself, similar finds have to be recorded. Especially famous is the colossal Hercules in gilt bronze, now preserved at the Museo Pio Clementio in the Vatican. Excepting the statue of Theodosius at Barletta, it is the largest of all known brazen statues of antiquity. This Hercules was found in 1864 beneath the Palazzo Righetti, hidden away in a mass of masonry which had formed a part of Pompey's theater. Here the demigod had been carefully immured. In all probability, it had been transported thither from the neighboring temple of the Oracle in the Circus Flaminius. The oracles were given by the statues themselves, and this property of theirs made them to be especially treasured by the heathen and especially hated by the Christians. A great hole in the neck of the figure seems to afford the explanation of the means by which the oracle was produced. On the day of the find, a child was introduced into the hollow body of the statue through this opening, its voice within producing unearthly sounds. It is thought that the statue must have suffered violence, as it is devoid of feet and legs, and at the back of the head bears traces of a fall. The marble Venus of the Capitoline Museum, a fine specimen of Greek art, was likewise found concealed in the foundations of a house in Suburba. The statue, which is chiseled out of the very best Paros marble, must have been almost perfect when it was thus concealed. It is possible that the Juno discovered in the recent excavations in the so-called Stadium of the Roman Palatine belongs to the same category. It was found carefully immured in a recumbent position in some foundations. A number of other idols found under similar circumstances may well have been concealed in times of danger. It is not unlikely that fanatics, pagans, and priests of the gods, if it was indeed they who were responsible for the concealment, may have hoped against hope for the return of paganism into public favor. An anonymous 5th century writer alludes to this hiding away of statues and applies to the pagans the words of Isaiah. They shall go into the holes of the rocks and into the caves of the earth. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 18 and following. I myself, he adds, have seen in Mauritania idols dragged forth from grottos and caves where they had been hidden, and all know that the same has taken place in other provinces also. The inhabitants of Rome, whose confidence in their city's fortifications was small, had been wont, ever since the time of the first incursions of the barbarians, to hide their treasures at the approach of danger. By those who knew their value, classic statues would naturally be accounted treasures. The mansions were everywhere full of works of art, especially of statues, and there can be no doubt that a number of the figures alluded to above were hidden at such moments of stress, and were afterwards either forgotten or allowed to remain in their secret quarters. This is the best explanation for the concealment of statues which have no connection with pagan worship. As an instance, we may mention the fine life-size boxers cast in bronze and found in digging the foundations of the National Theatre at Rome in 1885. This piece of work was discovered neatly erected on a specially prepared pedestal amidst the substructure of the ancient buildings. On the contrary, where we find valuable statues hidden together in large numbers, especially small ones made of precious metal, supposition points rather to their having been deposited by some successful robber during one of the sacks of Rome, who, in the end, had been forced to leave them behind, or else to having formed a part of a curio merchant's stock in trade. The temples and idols whose fate we have tried to bring rapidly before our readers are specimens of the mighty language in which Rome's own monuments unfold her past history. These buildings and their vicissitudes offer a truer and more vivid picture of the mental struggles of those times than any other records at our command. Nevertheless, to be still more intelligible, they require the vast background of contemporary history. The following chapter, a glance over general history from the time of Theodosius, and a study of the undercurrents of that history, will be an endeavor to bring before our eyes a picture of the spiritual transformation which marked the close of that early epoch.